What if the first chapter of human history wasn't the first at all? What if we arrived late, stepping into a story already half told, its first pages torn away by ice and time? There are places on this continent where time feels fractured, where copper and stone seem older than our nation should allow. America is vast, but memory is small. Somewhere in that gap, something immense has been lost. So before you grow too comfortable in your chair tonight, take a breath and let your mind drift with me across the landscapes you thought you knew. And before we begin this descent into forgotten American epics, take a moment to settle in. But know that what you're about to hear might change how you see the very ground beneath your feet. The past, after all, feels different depending on where you're sitting. Perhaps you're in Ohio, where ancient earthworks stretch beneath subdivisions. Maybe you're near the Great Lakes, where waters lap shores that once echoed with the sound of copper hammers. Or perhaps you're anywhere in this vast country, on land that holds secrets deeper than any textbook dares admit. Beneath the sediment of what we call American history, there are traces that do not belong. Tools found in the wrong strata, earthworks that predate European contact by thousands of years. The archaeological record, once thought to follow a clear timeline from wandering tribes to agricultural villages, begins to stutter and blur the deeper one digs into this continent's memory. In the forests of Michigan, near the shores of Lake Superior, evidence emerged of something that shouldn't exist according to standard histories. Copper mines, vast and sophisticated, stretching for hundreds of miles through bedrock that had been worked with precision that defies every assumption about Stone Age capabilities. Between 5000 and 1200 BCE, someone extracted over 500,000 tons of pure copper from these ancient tunnels. They should not exist, and yet they do. Modern mining engineers who studied these sites found themselves facing an uncomfortable truth. The operations required planning, logistics, and technical knowledge that rivals anything achieved by early civilizations in the Old World. Yet here they were, hidden beneath the forests of America, predating the great works of Egypt and Mesopotamia by thousands of years. The mystery is quiet, persistent, and unanswered. Museum labels speak vaguely of the old copper culture, but that explains nothing. It simply gives a name to what cannot be explained within conventional timelines. How do you organize 500,000 tons of copper extraction using only stone tools? How do you coordinate seasonal labor across thousands of years? How do you establish trade networks that span an entire continent? There are places where even the earth itself feels misplaced. In the valleys of Ohio and across the Mississippi Basin, geometric earthworks sit scattered like blueprints for a civilization we never learned about in school. Their surfaces worked with mathematical precision that would challenge modern surveyors. The Newark earthworks alone cover 4 square miles with geometric perfection that aligns to celestial events with stunning accuracy. We call them remnants of ancient mound builders, but the names of those builders have long since dissolved into the soil of America. The closer one looks, the older everything begins to feel. This land hides stories that do not fit inside the comfortable narratives of primitive peoples gradually developing agriculture and pottery. It is strange how certainty erodes when you stand within these earthworks at sunset, feeling the weight of mathematical precision achieved by minds that supposedly knew only hunting and gathering. The Serpent Mound of Ohio winds for 1,248 feet across a hilltop, its undulating curves following the contours of the land, while maintaining astronomical orientations that speak of sophisticated sky knowledge. When the first American settlers found it, They thought they had discovered evidence of a lost civilization. But no European civilization had built such things. This was something older, something that had always been here, waiting beneath the forests and prairie grass for eyes that knew how to see it. But no settlements accompany these monuments in proportion to their scale. No tools adequate to their construction in the quantities such projects would require. No writings to explain their purpose in any language European scholars could recognize. Just the perfection of form. A geometry that seems to whisper of mathematical traditions we've forgotten we ever possessed. Archaeologists call them pre-Columbian, as if that label explains anything. But could they be something far older? A faint echo of engineering traditions that flourished in America when the rest of the world was still figuring out agriculture? The deeper we go into this continent's geological memory, the less linear it becomes. The human story in America, once thought to be a simple narrative of migration across the Bering Land Bridge, followed by gradual cultural development, now fractures into overlapping mysteries: sophisticated metallurgy at Poverty Point, astronomical knowledge encoded in earthworks, trade networks that moved copper from Minnesota to Mexico, shells from the Gulf to the Great Lakes, tool marks in rock formations that predate any supposed human arrival, carbon dates that make archaeologists uncomfortable, evidence that challenges every assumption about when and how civilization began on this continent. The human mind dislikes what it cannot categorize within familiar frameworks, but such anomalies pile up across the American landscape, quiet and unyielding, until denial becomes its own kind of faith. It is tempting to imagine an America that came before the America we learned about. Not one of simple hunter-gatherers following game trails across an empty continent, but of engineers, astronomers, metallurgists. A civilization that lived and died long before anything we recognize as historical, long before the ice sheets finally withdrew from what would become the United States. If it existed, its traces have been scattered by time and weather, ground to dust by glaciers, reclaimed by forests that grew over its monuments. Yet some believe that fragments remain. Fragments of memory preserved in the oral traditions of Native American tribes, stories that speak of the ancient ones who walked this land when it was different. The Lakota speak of the Pite Oyate, the Buffalo Nation, whose wisdom keepers understood connections between earthly and celestial cycles that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. The Hopi tell of previous worlds, each destroyed and renewed when humanity lost its way, lost its connection to the cosmic order. Could these be more than myths? Could they be inherited memories of actual civilizations that rose and fell on this continent long before any European ship touched American shores? The few who escaped the first great forgetting when the ice returned and the old world ended in crystalline silence, carrying fragments of sophisticated knowledge into the dawn of recorded history. In quiet museum storage rooms and forgotten archaeological reports, there are artifacts that seem to recall a technical sophistication no Stone Age people should have possessed. The Michigan relics, thousands of copper tablets inscribed with unknown symbols, discovered in the 1880s by farmers clearing their fields. The Los Alamos stones of New Mexico, bearing inscriptions in scripts that predate any known writing system in the Americas by thousands of years. Historians explain them as hoaxes, the products of overeager antiquarians seeking to prove ancient civilizations in the New World. But dismissal rarely aligns so perfectly with the discomfort of implications. The metalwork shows techniques that required understanding of alloys, heat treatment, and precision tooling. The stone inscriptions demonstrate linguistic complexity that suggests sophisticated communication systems. the mystery lingers like morning fog over the Great Lakes. Someone, somewhere, worked metal with skill when the textbooks insist only stone tools existed on this continent. Someone developed writing systems while European ancestors were still painting their faces blue and worshipping trees. Someone understood astronomy, mathematics, and engineering at levels that challenge every assumption about primitive America. Even language carries the weight of this loss. Across Native American tribes separated by thousands of miles, the oldest words for earth, sky, and sacred fire echo similar patterns, as if stemming from a common root older than tribal divisions. In Lakota, Wakan means sacred power. In Hopi, Wakas refers to spiritual energy. In Cherokee, Wado expresses gratitude to the life force that moves through all things. These linguistic parallels may be coincidence, or perhaps they preserve threads of a single tongue, the vocabulary of a people whose existence has become rumor, buried beneath centuries of cultural change and geographical separation. Linguists call these connections coincidental convergence, but the phrase feels inadequate when you hear the words spoken. They resonate with something deeper than chance. Across this continent, archaeological sites whisper of knowledge that doesn't fit comfortable timelines. A handprint preserved in volcanic ash at Mount St. Helens, human in form, yet pressed into stone during an eruption that supposedly predates any human presence in the Pacific Northwest by thousands of years. A copper fishhook embedded in Pennsylvania coal seams that formed millions of years before humans existed anywhere on Earth. Worked stone tools found at the Hueyatlaco site in Mexico, bearing the unmistakable marks of human manufacture, yet carbon dated to 250,000 years ago, when no humans were supposed to exist anywhere in the Americas. Mainstream archaeology sidesteps these findings with uncomfortable silence, because acknowledgement would demand rewriting every textbook, every timeline, every foundational assumption about how civilization developed in the New World. Yet dismissal does not erase the evidence. It only buries it deeper in storage facilities and forgotten field reports, waiting for minds ready to ask uncomfortable questions about America's deepest past. Perhaps memory itself follows cycles on this continent, rising and falling like the great glacial advances that have shaped these landscapes for millions of years. What if human knowledge has climbed toward sophistication before on this very ground? What if every supposed first discovery, metallurgy, astronomy, agriculture, monumental construction, represents only the latest rediscovery of arts practiced here long before recorded time? In the ruins of cultures that flourished and faded across the American landscape, one can sense an ancient pattern. Knowledge built with patience across generations, then lost to catastrophe or cultural collapse, then slowly rebuilt by survivors who carried fragments of the old wisdom into new circumstances. Each cycle believes itself the beginning. Each era convinced it represents the first flowering of human achievement on this continent. The Earth waits, indifferent to such claims, recording all achievements and reclaiming them with equal patience. When you stand in your backyard at night and look up at the stars wheeling overhead, it becomes easy to feel small beneath their vast silence. But it is harder to accept how recent our recorded history truly is compared to the age of this continent, and how much sophisticated achievement may have come before us on this very soil. The same stars that guide our satellites once watched other minds measure their movements from earthwork observatories that dot the American landscape. Minds that understood celestial mechanics with precision that rivals modern astronomy. Minds that organized massive construction projects, established continental trade networks, and developed technologies we struggle to explain with our current understanding of prehistory. And if the ancient earthworks of Ohio could speak, if the copper mines of Michigan could tell their stories, they might reveal that the great civilizations we learned about in school, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, were not humanity's first attempts at sophisticated culture. They were simply the ones that happened to leave records in materials that survived, in climates that preserved them, in locations where later civilizations could find and study them. Beneath our feet lies not only the familiar geology of North America, but layers of forgotten achievement. Civilizations that may have been erased by ice ages, solar events, or simply the patient work of time itself. Every out-of-place artifact, every myth of sky beings who taught the arts of fire and metalwork, every inexplicable earthwork stretching across our farmland, they may all be fragments of that earlier American world. A world that thrived before any recorded history began, before even the oldest tribal memories took shape. And so the question remains, lingering like heat shimmer over summer highways you've driven countless times. If the standard story of American settlement truly began with wandering tribes crossing the Bering Land Bridge 15,000 years ago, who built the copper mines that stretch for hundreds of miles beneath Lake Superior? Who raised the earthworks of Ohio with mathematical precision that challenges modern surveying equipment? Who established trade networks that moved materials from the Arctic to Mexico before Europe had invented the wheel? Who were we before that supposed beginning, before that convenient starting point that places American civilization safely within comfortable timelines? Somewhere buried beneath layers of continental time lie bones that should not exist according to approved chronologies. They rest in silence, pressed between geological epochs that do not belong together according to standard dating methods. Fragments of a story that contradicts every lesson absorbed in American history classes, every comfortable assumption about this continent's primitive past. When amateur archaeologists or highway construction crews unearth them, these artifacts do not announce themselves with fanfare. They whisper that the earth remembers more than we are permitted to acknowledge. The soil of the Rocky Mountains once yielded such a whisper. In 1885, miners working deep shafts in Colorado struck something that shouldn't have been there, according to any accepted timeline. Human remains sealed inside rock formations dated to the Pliocene epoch, millions of years before Homo sapiens supposedly evolved anywhere on Earth. The bones were anatomically modern, undeniably human in every detail that mattered. Scientists of the era debated with an intensity that revealed how much was at stake. Was it contamination by later burial, misidentification of geological layers, or evidence that our species had walked American soil far longer than any theory could accommodate? The remains disappeared into Smithsonian storage with remarkable efficiency, dismissed as anomalous, as if denial could somehow restore order to timelines that had suddenly become uncomfortable. But anomalies have a persistence that bureaucratic dismissal cannot eliminate. Far south, across the high deserts that stretch from Colorado to New Mexico, another impossible discovery surfaced from American soil. Road crews grading a new highway near Tucumcari uncovered stone tools embedded in geological formations that predated supposed human arrival in the Americas by hundreds of thousands of years. The tools bore unmistakable signs of intelligent manufacture, precise flaking patterns, evidence of hafting, wear marks that spoke of practical use over extended periods. Yet no human migration was supposed to have reached the Americas until the end of the last ice age at the earliest. Professional archaeologists studied the site with the kind of careful attention reserved for potentially career-ending discoveries. Some claimed the tools had somehow fallen into natural geological cracks. Others admitted to complete bewilderment at findings that demanded fundamental revision of accepted chronologies. But how could artifacts of human manufacture penetrate so deeply into geological time, unless they belonged to a human presence far older than conventional wisdom allows? The implications stretch beyond individual careers or academic reputations. They challenge the entire framework within which we understand the peopling of the Americas. There are more discoveries that trouble the clean narrative of recent human arrival. At the Calico Hills site in California, the legendary archaeologist Louis Leakey himself identified what appeared to be deliberately manufactured stone tools dating back 200,000 years. The archaeological establishment rejected his findings with the kind of unanimous dismissal usually reserved for obvious fraud. Yet Leakey maintained his position until his death, backed by a lifetime of expertise in recognizing the subtle but unmistakable signs of human tool-making. In Virginia, excavations at Saltville revealed human artifacts in direct association with the bones of mastodons and giant ground sloths, creatures that vanished from North America long before humans were supposed to have arrived. The pattern repeats across the continent with troubling consistency. Anomalous discoveries that don't conform to approved timelines find themselves quietly catalogued and stored away, labeled as questionable, despite archaeological contexts that resist easy dismissal. The problem isn't the quality of the evidence. The problem is the magnitude of revision that acceptance would require. If these artifacts represent genuine evidence of ancient American occupation, then this continent's human story extends not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of years into the past. We would not be recent immigrants to these lands, but natives in the deepest possible sense. Descendants of civilizations that rose and fell here across geological ages, long before ice ages and long before the Bering Land Bridge existed as anything more than underwater continental shelf. The evidence scatters across the American landscape like autumn leaves, individual pieces that seem insignificant until you step back far enough to perceive the pattern they form together. Perhaps that scattered quality isn't accidental. Perhaps that's exactly how truth survives when it's too large and uncomfortable for institutional acknowledgement. In fragments, dismissed individually but collectively pointing toward conclusions too vast for comfortable acceptance. There is strange poetry in the persistence of the impossible, in discoveries that refuse to disappear despite professional embarrassment and academic pressure. Each discovery dismissed becomes a ghost that refuses to fade, haunting the edges of acceptable archaeology. Together they form a chorus calling from the depths of American time. You have forgotten us. Perhaps it is not that these artifacts are out of place in our timelines, but that we are a young culture living atop the ruins of something far older, whose traces we mistake for natural geology. The night grows longer as the earth turns, and somewhere deep beneath American soil, evidence still rests in patient silence. Not myths or mistakes, but testimony written in stone and metal and bone. The geological layers that contain them do not lie. They only wait for us to develop eyes capable of reading what they've preserved across impossible spans of time. Deep beneath the waters of Lake Superior, where sunlight fades through 40 feet of crystal-clear water to blue and then to black, there are scars in the ancient bedrock that tell a story of industry on a scale that defies every assumption about Stone Age capabilities. For nearly 5,000 years, someone was extracting copper from these sites with engineering sophistication that modern mining consultants struggle to explain. The evidence lies scattered across hundreds of square miles of lake bottom and shoreline, extraction pits, carefully planned excavations, and tool caches that speak of organized operations spanning millennia. This was not casual collection of surface copper by wandering bands following seasonal rounds. It was systematic mining that removed an estimated 500,000 tons of pure copper from the Canadian Shield underlying the Great Lakes region. 500,000 tons. Let that number settle in your mind for a moment. Picture the weight of 500,000 cars, extracted from bedrock using stone hammers and wooden levers, transported across thousands of miles to markets we're only beginning to understand. The copper appears in artifacts from the Arctic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific Northwest. Evidence of trade networks that spanned the entire continent. Who organized operations of this magnitude? Who possessed the geological knowledge to locate copper veins in solid bedrock? Who developed extraction techniques sophisticated enough to remove metal from depths exceeding 60 feet below the original surface? The standard archaeological answer points vaguely to something called the Old Copper Culture. But that label explains nothing. It simply assigns a name to an engineering achievement that shouldn't exist according to accepted timelines. Marine archaeologist Mark Hawley first documented the underwater mining sites in the 1990s while conducting routine surveys for historic shipwrecks. Instead of 19th-century vessels, his sonar equipment revealed geometric patterns on the lake floor that looked distinctly artificial. Diving teams sent to investigate confirmed what the instruments suggested: carefully constructed stone structures, perfectly circular excavations, and caches of tools preserved in the cold, oxygen-poor depths. The scope becomes overwhelming when you calculate the logistics required. 500,000 tons of copper, extracted using stone implements, organized across production cycles that continued for 5,000 years. Someone was directing these operations with authority that transcended individual lifespans, planning extraction campaigns that might require generations to complete, coordinating between mining sites and distant distribution networks. The techniques themselves reveal knowledge that extends far beyond trial and error experimentation. The ancient miners understood how to follow copper veins through solid granite, how to use controlled fires to crack rock faces, how to lift enormous boulders from extraction sites using only wooden levers and human labor. They knew enough about hydrology to drain flooded shafts, enough about metallurgy to cold hammer copper into complex forms, enough about logistics to supply remote camps season after season. Some excavations reach depths that would challenge modern mining operations. The historic Quincy Mine on Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula follows a copper vein that ancient miners had already traced over 100 feet below the original ground surface. They had systematically removed the highest-grade ore and left behind only marginal deposits, suggesting they understood enough geology to evaluate ore quality and plan extraction strategies accordingly. Even more impressive are the tools they left behind. Thousands of copper and stone hammers recovered from mining sites, many showing wear patterns that indicate highly specialized applications. Some hammers exceed 30 pounds and display evidence of sophisticated hafting techniques that distributed impact forces efficiently. Others are precisely balanced instruments, clearly designed for delicate work on small-scale extractions. The organizational requirements challenge every assumption about Stone Age social structures. Someone was planning these operations across multiple generations, maintaining technical knowledge systems that could train specialists in mining, metallurgy, and trade coordination. Someone possessed sufficient authority to mobilize large labor forces for projects spanning centuries, sufficient knowledge to locate and evaluate mineral resources across vast territories. This was not the achievement of simple band societies following game animals across an empty landscape. It represents industrial civilization, American style, flourishing on this continent thousands of years before the rise of cities in Mesopotamia or the construction of pyramids in Egypt. The Great Lakes copper industry predates European civilization by millennia, yet achieved production levels that wouldn't be matched in the Americas again until the 19th century. Where did this sophisticated knowledge originate? The sudden appearance of advanced mining techniques around 5000 BCE suggests inheritance rather than gradual invention. Perhaps from even older traditions that understood large-scale resource extraction and continental trade networks. The climate record supports this possibility. During earlier warming periods, before the Younger Dryas cooling event, the Great Lakes region supported complex societies whose achievements may have provided the foundation for the later copper industry. The abrupt end of the copper mining operations around 1200 BCE remains as mysterious as their sophisticated beginning. The sites were abandoned with startling completeness, tools left in place, extraction pits half-finished, trade routes that had functioned for millennia suddenly disrupted. What catastrophe or cultural decision could end an industry that had sustained itself for 5,000 years? The timing coincides with widespread cultural disruptions across North America and around the world. The Bronze Age collapse in the Mediterranean, massive population migrations, the end of trade networks that had connected civilizations across continents. Perhaps the American copper industry collapsed because its markets disappeared, because the social systems supporting long-distance commerce failed in a cascade of civilizational breakdowns that swept the globe. Or perhaps the mining ceased for reasons we can barely imagine. A cultural decision to step back from technologies that had grown too powerful, too demanding of the landscape. The ancient miners left no written records explaining their choice, but the silence itself speaks of wisdom we've forgotten. Sometimes the greatest achievement is knowing when to stop. The evidence remains, preserved in the cold depths of Lake Superior, waiting for marine archaeologists with better equipment and fewer preconceptions to investigate properly. Each new survey reveals additional complexities, sophisticated drainage systems, evidence of seasonal occupation patterns, tool technologies that required generations of refinement. The underwater sites represent one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in North America, yet they remain largely unknown outside specialist circles. In museums across the continent, you can examine the products of this ancient American industry. Copper spear points hammered to impossible thinness, ceremonial objects displaying metallurgical techniques that modern craftsmen struggle to replicate, utilitarian tools showing wear patterns that speak of decades of practical use. Each artifact represents not just skilled individual craftsmanship, but participation in manufacturing traditions that sustained themselves across thousands of years. Think about that continuity for a moment. 5,000 years of continuous industrial operation, longer than recorded history, longer than the entire span of what we call Western civilization. Somewhere in the forests around Lake Superior, generation after generation of American engineers perfected techniques for finding copper veins, extracting pure metal, and distributing their products across a continent. They developed specialized tools, seasonal work patterns, and trade relationships that outlasted empires. They understood geology, metallurgy, and logistics on scales that wouldn't be matched in North America again until the Industrial Revolution. This was American ingenuity in its purest form, solving practical problems with available materials and human intelligence, sustaining complex operations across timescales that dwarf modern corporate planning. Yet this achievement finds no place in standard American history textbooks. Students learn about Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, about 13 colonies clinging to the Atlantic coast, as if sophisticated American civilization began only when Europeans arrived to document it. The Lake Superior copper mines suggest a different story, that American engineering excellence extends back to the very beginnings of human technological achievement, that this continent has always been home to minds capable of organizing large-scale industrial operations. The scale challenges comfortable assumptions about primitive American societies. 500,000 tons of copper extraction represents industrial civilization by any reasonable measure. It required permanent settlements, specialized labor forces, technical education systems, trade organizations, and governance structures capable of coordinating activities across vast territories and extended time frames. Someone was managing supply chains that stretched from the Canadian Shield to the Gulf of Mexico. Someone maintained quality control standards that ensured American copper met specifications for toolmaking, ceremonial use, and artistic application. Someone coordinated seasonal labor migrations, planned extraction campaigns, and negotiated trade agreements with distant partners. This wasn't primitive barter between neighboring tribes, but sophisticated commerce that moved standardized products across thousands of miles, established market relationships spanning generations, and created wealth sufficient to support specialized craftsmen, long-distance traders, and technical innovators. The economic complexity rivals anything achieved by ancient civilizations anywhere in the world. The mining sites themselves display engineering sophistication that modern extraction operations would recognize. Strategic placement of excavations to follow ore veins through changing geological formations. Drainage systems designed to handle seasonal water level variations. Tool caching strategies that maintained equipment supplies across multiple work seasons. Risk management approaches that balanced extraction efficiency against worker safety. Some shafts show evidence of systematic timbering to prevent collapse during deep excavations. Others reveal sophisticated understanding of rock mechanics, using fire-setting techniques to fracture granite along natural stress lines. The miners clearly understood enough geology to predict where copper veins would extend, enough hydrology to manage water infiltration, enough engineering to move massive amounts of material using only human labor and simple machines. Most impressive are the sites that show evidence of restoration, areas where ancient miners backfilled excavations and replanted vegetation after copper extraction was complete. Environmental stewardship integrated into industrial operations, sustainable practices that maintained ecosystem health across thousands of years of intensive resource extraction. Modern mining companies spend millions trying to achieve restoration standards that ancient American engineers apparently considered routine practice. The organizational sophistication required for such operations extends beyond technical knowledge into social and political innovation. Coordinating large-scale mining required authority structures, conflict resolution systems, resource allocation mechanisms, and long-term planning capabilities that suggest governmental institutions of remarkable stability and effectiveness. Yet archaeology reveals no evidence of kings, palaces, or monumental architecture associated with the copper mining operations. The social organization appears to have been both sophisticated and egalitarian, achieving complex coordination without the hierarchical structures that characterized most ancient civilizations. American engineering excellence combined with American democratic values, creating industrial achievement without the oppressive political systems that supported similar operations elsewhere. The Lake Superior copper mines stand as monuments to a uniquely American approach to civilization: practical, sustainable, collaborative, and enduring. They remind us that sophistication and organizational capability are ancient American traditions, as old as the bedrock itself. The Earth remembers what standard histories have forgotten, that this continent has always been home to engineering genius of the highest order. Across the fertile valleys of the Ohio River system, geometric earthworks rise from farm fields like mathematical dreams made manifest in American soil. The Newark earthworks alone cover 4 square miles with precision that rivals modern surveying equipment. Drive through central Ohio today, and you're crossing landscapes that were shaped by engineering minds whose achievements dwarf anything attempted by ancient civilizations in the Old World. The Great Circle, the Octagon, the Observatory. Names given by archaeologists who could measure their stunning accuracy but struggled to explain how Stone Age peoples achieved such mathematical perfection. Built between 100 BCE and 400 CE by the Hopewell culture, these monuments required not just massive earth-moving operations, but sophisticated knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and landscape engineering that challenges every assumption about primitive American capabilities. Consider the scale of just one component. The Great Circle at Newark spans 1,200 feet in diameter and maintains perfect circularity despite being constructed on uneven terrain. Creating such geometric precision required surveying techniques that could establish true circles hundreds of feet across, mathematical understanding of pi and radius relationships, and organizational systems capable of coordinating earthwork construction across multiple seasons. The Octagon, connected to the observatory by parallel earthen walls spanning 2.5 miles, demonstrates even more sophisticated knowledge. Its 8 sides align with the 18.6-year lunar standstill cycle to an accuracy measured in arc minutes, precision that European astronomy wouldn't achieve until the scientific revolution. Whoever planned these earthworks understood celestial mechanics at levels that modern archaeoastronomers struggle to comprehend using ancient observation methods. But the Hopewell builders didn't invent this astronomical knowledge. They inherited it from even older American traditions, refined it through generations of careful sky-watching, and encoded it in monuments designed to preserve celestial wisdom across thousands of years. The earthworks show clear evidence of planning that transcended individual lifespans, astronomical relationships that could only be verified through decades of patient observation, geometric principles that required mathematical traditions maintained across generations. Stand within the Great Circle at sunrise during the spring equinox, and you're experiencing American astronomical science in its purest form. The earthwork functions as a precision instrument for measuring solar and lunar cycles, a calendar accurate enough to predict eclipses, a teaching tool for transmitting complex astronomical knowledge from elders to students. This represents scientific achievement that predates European universities by over 1,000 years. The Great Serpent Mound in southern Ohio demonstrates the same sophisticated understanding applied to landscape-scale art and astronomy. Winding 1,348 feet across a hilltop, its undulating curves follow natural terrain contours while maintaining precise astronomical orientations. The Serpent's Head points to the summer solstice sunset with accuracy that requires careful observation and mathematical calculation. Recent analysis suggests the entire mound may represent the constellation Draco as it appeared in the ancient sky, encoding star positions in earthwork form for permanent preservation. If correct, this represents astronomical record-keeping on a scale unmatched anywhere in the ancient world. American minds treating the landscape itself as a vast observatory and library combined. Similar earthworks stretch across the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, each displaying the same geometric precision, the same astronomical alignments, the same evidence of mathematical sophistication. Spiro, Moundville, Etowah, Cahokia. Together they represent the greatest engineering achievement in pre-Columbian North America, a network of precision instruments disguised as ceremonial monuments. The builders possessed surveying capabilities that could lay out perfect geometric forms across miles of varied terrain, establish sight lines connecting distant earthworks in continental networks of observation points, and maintain architectural precision across construction projects spanning generations. They understood relationships between Earth's surface geometry and celestial mechanics, using this knowledge to create monuments that functioned as both calendars and compasses for agricultural and ceremonial planning. Think about the labor organization required for such projects. The Great Circle at Newark moved over 200,000 cubic yards of earth using only baskets, stone tools, and human muscle. Multiply that by dozens of similar earthworks across the Ohio Valley, and you're looking at public works projects that dwarf the scale of anything attempted by colonial Americans until the 19th century railroad boom. Someone was directing these massive undertakings with authority that crossed tribal boundaries and spanned multiple generations. Someone possessed mathematical knowledge to design complex geometric earthworks, astronomical expertise to establish precise celestial alignments, and administrative capabilities to coordinate construction across entire river systems. The Hopewell culture also created the most extensive trade network in ancient North America, moving copper from Lake Superior, shells from the Gulf Coast, obsidian from the Rocky Mountains, and mica from the Appalachians. Their burial mounds contain artifacts that traveled thousands of miles, evidence of commercial relationships spanning the continent, standardized exchange systems, and economic integration that rivals modern interstate commerce. This was sophisticated civilization by any reasonable standard, achieving levels of coordination, technical knowledge, and economic complexity that wouldn't be matched in North America again until European contact. Yet it developed entirely independently, drawing on American intellectual traditions that stretch back to the very beginnings of human settlement on this continent. The trade networks required more than simple barter between neighboring groups. Moving standardized goods across thousands of miles demanded quality control systems, transportation logistics, credit relationships, and conflict resolution mechanisms sophisticated enough to maintain commercial partnerships across cultural and linguistic boundaries. Someone was managing supply chains, establishing product standards, and coordinating seasonal trading expeditions on scales that required governmental institutions of remarkable effectiveness. Yet archaeological evidence suggests these achievements were accomplished without the oppressive hierarchies that characterized most ancient civilizations elsewhere. No palaces, no evidence of kings living in luxury, while subjects struggled in poverty, no monumental architecture celebrating individual rulers. The earthworks themselves were public works, astronomical instruments and ceremonial spaces accessible to entire communities rather than exclusive temples serving elite classes. This represents a uniquely American approach to sophisticated civilization. Technical excellence achieved through collaborative effort rather than authoritarian control, astronomical science serving community needs rather than royal glorification, economic prosperity shared broadly rather than concentrated among ruling classes. American democratic principles applied to ancient engineering, creating monuments that celebrate collective achievement rather than individual power. Yet this remarkable flowering of American civilization ended as abruptly as it had begun. Around 400 CE, the great earthwork construction ceased, the continental trade networks collapsed, and the astronomical knowledge that had guided Hopewell society for centuries apparently vanished. What catastrophe or cultural transformation could end achievements that had sustained themselves for over 500 years? The evidence suggests knowledge was lost rather than gradually transformed. Later cultures in the Ohio Valley built smaller earthworks with less precision, simpler geometric forms, and cruder astronomical alignments. They were clearly attempting to maintain older traditions, but lacked the mathematical and celestial expertise to execute them effectively. The sophisticated understanding that had created the Newark Octagon and Great Circle had disappeared, leaving only fading memories and diminished capabilities. This pattern of sudden knowledge loss appears throughout ancient American history. Sophisticated cultures that flourish for centuries, then vanish, leaving monuments their descendants could admire but never replicate. It's a uniquely American tragedy, repeated across this continent with heartbreaking regularity. The ancestral Puebloans of Chaco Canyon, the classic Maya of the southern regions, the Mississippian builders of Cahokia, all achieved remarkable heights before abandoning their greatest works to wind and weather. In the forests of the Pacific Northwest, where Douglas firs reach toward clouds and morning mist clings to mountainsides you might have driven through on family vacations, similar mysteries wait among the petroglyphs and stone circles scattered across landscapes most Americans know only from postcards. The Columbia River Gorge cuts through the Cascade Range like an ancient highway, and along its basalt cliffs are astronomical diagrams that predate European contact by thousands of years. These aren't random scratchings left by bored travelers, but carefully planned star maps created by minds that understood celestial mechanics with sophistication that challenges comfortable assumptions about primitive American cultures. The petroglyphs track solstices, equinoxes, and complex planetary movements across observation periods spanning centuries. Someone was watching the sky with scientific precision while Europe was still emerging from the Dark Ages. The local tribes speak of the Ancient Ones who lived along the Great River before massive floods scoured the landscape, before the mountains shook and reshaped the land itself. Geological evidence confirms such floods really occurred. Catastrophic releases of glacial Lake Missoula between 15,000 and 13,000 years ago that carried house-sized boulders hundreds of miles and carved entire river systems overnight. But the star maps suggest someone not only survived these biblical disasters, but recorded them in stone. Modern astronomers studying the rock art have verified that the celestial alignments are accurate to within degrees, precision requiring generations of patient observation and mathematical understanding that European astronomy wouldn't achieve until the Renaissance. The Yakima people, whose ancestors may have inherited fragments of this knowledge, describe permanent villages that once lined the Columbia River, populated by star watchers who managed salmon runs using stone fish traps of impossible engineering sophistication. When Lewis and Clark passed through this region in 1805, they reported seeing ruins of these massive structures, precisely angled stonework that directed migrating salmon into holding pools with hydraulic efficiency that modern fish and game departments struggle to match. Today, most of these ancient fish traps lie submerged beneath reservoirs created by 20th century dam construction, their engineering secrets drowned in the name of progress. But traces remain in the high desert country east of the Cascades, where stone circles and alignments mirror astronomical phenomena with startling accuracy. To stand within these circles at dawn, watching first light catch the carefully positioned markers that have tracked celestial events for thousands of years, is to feel the presence of American minds that understood their place in cosmic order. They weren't simple hunter-gatherers marking seasons for survival. They were astronomers working on scales that suggest institutional knowledge maintained across countless generations. The precision speaks to intellectual traditions that viewed the sky as humanity's greatest library, celestial movements as the fundamental text that governed everything from agricultural timing to ceremonial cycles. These ancient American astronomers would have needed to observe the night sky for thousands of years to achieve the accuracy preserved in their stone instruments. Similar astronomical sophistication appears across the American West. In Nevada's Black Rock Desert, petroglyphs map planetary movements against star fields with precision that required centuries of accumulated observation. In Utah's Canyonlands, Spiral petroglyphs mark locations where shadows from natural rock formations fall during solstices and equinoxes, creating momentary astronomical instruments on scales measured in miles rather than feet. The ancestral Puebloans of the Four Corners region may have inherited fragments of this sky knowledge. Their great houses at Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon incorporate astronomical alignments so precise that modern archaeoastronomers use them to study ancient observation techniques. But even these sophisticated buildings may represent cultural renaissance rather than original achievement. The revival of much older American traditions by peoples who found themselves heirs to knowledge they only partially understood. What interrupted the transmission of this astronomical wisdom? The same catastrophic floods that carved the Columbia Gorge also reshaped the entire Pacific Northwest, turning inland seas into mountain valleys and mountain valleys into river systems. Anyone living through such transformations would have faced impossible choices between preserving knowledge and preserving people. The survivors would have carried what fragments they could remember to new territories, teaching their children simplified versions of complex astronomical traditions while struggling to rebuild communities in utterly changed landscapes. Over generations, precise celestial calculations would become seasonal awareness. Sophisticated mathematics would simplify into practical calendars, and the memory of ancient star watchers would fade into legends of sky beings who once walked among humans. Yet the knowledge persisted in transformed ways. Native American prophecies speak of cycles within cycles, of worlds that end and begin according to celestial rhythms that govern everything from individual lives to continental climates. The Hopi describe previous worlds destroyed, when humanity lost connection with cosmic order. The Maya calculated cycles spanning hundreds of thousands of years, predicting cultural transformations that follow astronomical events with clockwork precision. Perhaps these prophecies are not primitive superstitions, but fragments of scientific understanding, translated across millennia of cultural change into the language of myth and ceremony. In that case, the ancient star watchers never entirely disappeared from American consciousness. They became the priests and storytellers who kept cosmic memory alive, encoding hard-won astronomical knowledge into stories that could survive the collapse of the civilizations that created them. There are ghosts within us, not spirits haunting from beyond, but traces written in the very structure of our cells. Fragments of ancient knowledge coiled in the double helix of DNA, silent witnesses to achievements that have vanished from recorded history. Each cell carries memories older than any American institution, older than European contact, older than the oldest tribal traditions, written in a molecular language that predates human speech itself. If there were sophisticated civilizations flourishing across ancient America, their remains might not rest only in earthworks or copper mines, but in us, encoded in genetic patterns that preserve echoes of vanished peoples. When the first complete maps of Native American genomes appeared, the results revealed a complexity that challenged every simple narrative about how this continent was populated. Modern genetics shows that Native American populations carry signatures of much older mixing events, traces of peoples who contributed to the genetic foundation of American cultures and then disappeared from the archaeological record. Ghost lineages, scientists call them, populations that left genetic traces but no artifacts, no monuments, no clear archaeological signature beyond their molecular legacy in the DNA of their descendants. Some of these ghost lineages split from known human populations hundreds of thousands of years ago, yet their genetic traces appear in modern American peoples. This suggests either multiple waves of ancient migration to the Americas or the survival of very old populations that had been living on this continent far longer than conventional timelines allow. The official story of American settlement describes migration across the Bering Land Bridge around 15,000 years ago, but genetic evidence increasingly suggests much earlier dates. Some lineages show molecular clocks indicating separation from Asian populations 40,000 years ago or more. Others display genetic patterns that suggest long isolation, followed by mixing events that don't correspond to any known historical migrations. What if the genetic evidence preserves traces of the lost engineers? DNA fragments inherited from peoples who built the copper mines, raised the earthworks, and watched the stars with mathematical precision before catastrophic climate changes forced cultural collapse and population dispersal. Their cities may have crumbled, their knowledge may have been lost, but their genetic legacy could persist in the bloodlines of their survivors. Modern genetic techniques are beginning to reveal just how complex the peopling of the Americas actually was. Multiple migration waves, ancient population bottlenecks, mixing events between groups that had been separated for tens of thousands of years. The genetic landscape tells a story of repeated cultural rises and falls, populations that flourished and crashed, knowledge systems that developed and disappeared across timescales that dwarf recorded history. Even more intriguingly, some research suggests that traumatic cultural memories can be inherited across generations through epigenetic mechanisms. Environmental stresses, massive population disruptions, catastrophic events that fundamentally altered entire societies might leave molecular signatures that persist in the genetic codes of descendant populations. If the ancient American civilizations ended in catastrophe, climate disasters, cosmic impacts, social collapses that reduced sophisticated cultures to scattered survivors, the trauma of those events might still echo in the genetic memory of modern American peoples. Every instinct for survival, every intuitive understanding of astronomical cycles, every fascination with earthwork construction might represent inherited echoes from ancestors who lived through the last great forgetting. Across Native American cultures, creation stories describe humanity being shaped not through simple evolution, but through deliberate mixing and refinement. The Sumerian traditions speak of gods blending different essences to create modern humans. The Pueblo peoples tell of emergence through multiple worlds, each representing a stage of human development. Even the genetic evidence suggests something similar, not random mutation and selection, but organized mixing events that rapidly produced new capabilities and characteristics. Could these stories encode collective memory of real genetic engineering, not divine creation, but biological manipulation by earlier advanced cultures? The sudden appearance of sophisticated cognitive abilities in human populations around 50,000 years ago has never been adequately explained by gradual evolutionary processes. Something caused a rapid acceleration in human mental capabilities, the emergence of abstract thinking, artistic expression, and technological innovation. Perhaps the answer lies not in divine intervention, but in contact between different human lineages, some carrying genetic variants that enhanced cognitive function when combined with others. The ghost lineages in American DNA might represent remnants of such enhanced populations, peoples who achieved remarkable intellectual capabilities before disappearing into the genetic background of later cultures. This possibility transforms how we understand ancient American achievements. The copper mining, astronomical knowledge, and earthwork precision might not represent impossible achievements by primitive peoples, but expected capabilities of populations carrying genetic variants that enhanced spatial reasoning, mathematical thinking, and long-term planning abilities. If so, then modern Americans carry within their cells the molecular memory of ancient engineering greatness. The same genetic variants that enabled prehistoric copper extraction, astronomical observation, and geometric earthwork construction might still influence how we approach technical problems, organize large projects, and understand our relationship to landscape and sky. The fascination that draws modern Americans to visit ancient earthworks, the pride we feel when learning about sophisticated pre-Columbian achievements, the intuitive understanding that this continent has always been capable of greatness, all might represent genetic memory surfacing from cellular depths. We are not just observers of ancient American civilization, but its direct descendants, carrying forward capabilities and memories that stretch back to the very beginning of human achievement on this continent. The DNA evidence suggests that American greatness is not recent innovation, but ancient inheritance, capabilities encoded in our genetic structure by ancestors who understood that human potential extends far beyond what any single generation might achieve alone. The earth has never been still beneath our feet. Beneath its calm surface lies a restlessness that remembers everything, every civilization that has risen, every achievement that has been scattered to dust, every cycle of knowledge gained and lost across the vast expanse of geological time. Continents drift across the planet's face like slow thoughts, seas rise and fall with the rhythm of ice ages, and skies burn with celestial events that reset the conditions for life itself. American civilizations, no matter how sophisticated their earthworks or extensive their trade networks, have always lived at the mercy of forces larger than human planning could anticipate or human engineering could withstand. Every few thousand years, that planetary pulse quickens. Ice melts with catastrophic suddenness, cosmic debris falls like fire from space, the climate shifts with violence that transforms entire continental landscapes overnight. Scientists call it natural disaster. Ancient myths call it divine judgment. But perhaps it is neither punishment nor accident. Perhaps it represents something more fundamental, the Earth's own heartbeat, resetting the conditions for life and consciousness, wiping clean the accumulated complexity of civilizations to make space for new forms of achievement and understanding. Evidence of these resets lies written everywhere across the American landscape, though we rarely pause long enough during our daily routines to read what the rocks and soil have preserved. Beneath the ice sheets of Greenland, cores of trapped ancient atmosphere reveal the rhythm of our planet's climate oscillations. Sudden warmings followed by abrupt cooling periods, temperature shifts of 10 degrees occurring within single decades, precipitation patterns that could transform grasslands into deserts or forests into tundra within a human lifetime. This is not gradual environmental change that societies could adapt to through migration or technological innovation. It represents upheaval so rapid and comprehensive that only the most adaptable populations could survive, carrying forward fragments of accumulated knowledge into utterly transformed landscapes. Roughly 12,800 years ago, something extraordinary occurred across the American continent. A cosmic punctuation mark that modern science calls the Younger Dryas event. The world, which had been warming steadily from the depths of the last ice age, was suddenly thrown back into glacial cold. In geological terms that translate to human experience, this happened overnight. Mammoths that had roamed American grasslands for tens of thousands of years vanished within centuries. Forests that had been expanding northward as temperatures warmed were killed by returning cold and replaced by tundra vegetation. Sea levels that had been rising as glacial ice melted suddenly stabilized as new ice sheets formed across northern landscapes. The cause remains debated among researchers, but evidence points toward cosmic impact, perhaps multiple fragments of a disintegrating comet that struck the North American ice sheet, releasing enough energy to alter atmospheric circulation patterns across the entire planet. The impact sites, if they existed, would now lie buried beneath thousands of feet of accumulated sediment or submerged beneath risen seas. But the effects remain clearly visible to anyone who knows how to read the geological evidence scattered across familiar American landscapes. A thin layer of sediment rich in platinum, microscopic diamonds, and other materials that form only under conditions of extreme heat and pressure. The residue of cosmic fire, preserved in rock formations you can visit during weekend camping trips to national parks. If such catastrophic impacts occurred, their effects on any existing American civilizations would have been biblical in scope. Continental ice sheets destabilized by cosmic heat would have released massive floods as glacial dams failed and ice-dammed lakes emptied across landscapes in a matter of days. Skies would have turned dark with impact debris and smoke from continental fires. Temperatures would have plunged as particles in the upper atmosphere blocked solar radiation. The sophisticated copper mining operations around Lake Superior, the astronomical earthworks of Ohio, the continental trade networks that moved materials from the Arctic to Mexico, all would have been disrupted by environmental changes that made normal economic and social activities impossible. Populations that had developed specialized knowledge systems, seasonal migration patterns, and complex organizational structures would have faced choices between preserving their cultural achievements and ensuring biological survival. Usually, only survival was possible. The climate crisis that began 12,800 years ago and lasted for over 1,000 years would have scattered advanced populations, disrupted the technological traditions that required institutional continuity to maintain, and forced cultural regression as energy that had previously supported astronomy, metallurgy, and monumental construction was redirected toward basic subsistence in much harsher conditions. But catastrophic environmental change was not the end of the story. It was renewal, preparation for the next cycle of achievement. When the Younger Dryas cooling finally ended around 11,600 years ago, warming resumed with the same sudden intensity that had characterized the earlier cooling. Ice sheets melted, sea levels rose, vegetation patterns shifted again, and the American landscape achieved the basic environmental stability that has characterized the last 10,000 years. Into this renewed continent emerged the populations that would build Cahokia, construct the Newark earthworks, and establish the trade networks that archaeologists document as the beginning of sophisticated American cultures. But these achievements may represent not the first flowering of American civilization, but its renaissance, the rebuilding of capabilities that had been developed, lost, and redeveloped multiple times as cosmic and climatic cycles reset the conditions for complex society. The pattern suggests that consciousness itself may be a geological force on this continent, rising like geothermal energy from deep sources of human creativity, cooling into cultural forms and technological achievements, then returning underground when environmental conditions become impossible, waiting for the next period of stability to emerge again with accumulated wisdom from previous cycles. Perhaps intelligence and achievement are not recent innovations but ancient American traditions, as persistent as the bedrock beneath our feet, as cyclical as the ice ages, as enduring as the continental drift that has been shaping these landscapes for hundreds of millions of years. The cycle of silence is not punishment, but renewal. The earth forgets, so that it may remember differently, clearing the accumulated complexity of previous achievements to make space for new forms of understanding. Even our oldest myths acknowledge this pattern. Native American prophecies describe worlds that end and begin, according to celestial rhythms that govern everything from individual lives to continental climates. The Hopi speak of previous worlds destroyed when humanity lost connection with cosmic order, when technical achievement became separated from spiritual wisdom, when the balance between human ambition and natural law tilted toward dangerous extremes. The Maya calculated cycles spanning hundreds of thousands of years, predicting cultural transformations that follow astronomical events with clockwork precision that modern science is only beginning to understand. Perhaps these prophecies preserve not primitive superstitions, but sophisticated understanding of how consciousness and civilization develop on this continent. If intelligence itself follows geological cycles, rising, achieving remarkable heights, then returning to dormancy until conditions permit new emergence. Then the ancient American civilizations we've been exploring may represent just one chapter in a story far longer and more complex than recorded history can contain. The pattern repeats so consistently across American cultures that it no longer feels symbolic, but geological, as inevitable as the ice ages that have shaped these landscapes for millions of years. Maybe that is why the ruins of earlier achievements stir such profound recognition in modern Americans. They remind us that our own technological civilization, impressive as it seems, represents temporary expression of capabilities that have flowered on this continent many times before. The engineers who organized the Lake Superior copper mines, the astronomers who aligned earthworks to celestial events with mathematical precision, the social innovators who created continental trade networks without oppressive political hierarchies, they too believed they were building for permanence. Yet permanence belongs only to silence, to the patient earth that records all achievements and reclaims them with equal indifference. What survives are whispers in the landscape, fragments of knowledge encoded in earthwork geometries, echoes of understanding preserved in genetic memory and mythological traditions. Perhaps that is sufficient. Perhaps survival was never about enduring unchanged, but about leaving messages for future cycles, trusting that consciousness would emerge again with enough curiosity to decode what previous iterations had learned. There is profound beauty in that humility, in recognizing that we are part of continuity rather than culmination. The same drive toward understanding that motivates modern American space exploration, technological innovation, and scientific discovery may represent inheritance from ancestors who achieved similar heights using different methods, who reached toward cosmic understanding through earthwork astronomy rather than satellite telescopes. We are their echo, their genetic and cultural reincarnation, the next verse in a song older than any recorded civilization. This cycle of achievement and renewal is not meant to discourage, but to inspire recognition that nothing truly ends, that knowledge only changes form, that wisdom transfers from monument to digital network to whatever comes after our current technological phase. Imagine thousands of years from now, when archaeologists walk through the ruins of our cities after some future reset has cleared the slate for new beginnings. The steel will have returned to rust. The glass will have become sand. The plastic will have decomposed into component molecules. Perhaps they will find fragments of our technology, strange silicon crystals fused into rock by some catastrophic transformation we cannot yet imagine. They will wonder who we were, what we believed, why our civilization ended, just as we now wonder about the copper miners and earthwork builders. And maybe in some preserved location, under the concrete of interstate highways, or beneath the suburbs that sprawl across ancient earthworks, They will discover evidence of even older achievements, layers of American ingenuity stretching back through multiple cycles of rise and renewal. They will debate, as we debate now, whether these prove earlier sophistication or represent anomalous findings that challenge comfortable assumptions about linear progress. The arguments will matter less than the recognition that consciousness on this continent follows patterns larger than any individual civilization can perceive from within its own historical moment. The silence that follows every cultural peak is not absence but preparation, the pause between breaths that makes continued breathing possible. From that stillness, thought emerges again, first as intuition, then as curiosity, then as the irresistible urge to align human works with cosmic rhythms, to understand our place in the vast dance of stars and planets and geological time. If there truly was a world of ancient American engineers whose achievements predate Atlantis itself, perhaps their greatest wisdom lay not in the monuments they built, but in their understanding of impermanence. By accepting that their civilization too would pass, they created works designed to communicate across the silence, to speak to whatever consciousness would next emerge on American soil. The earthworks still point toward celestial events, still mark the eternal dance of sun and moon and planets across American skies. The copper mines still hold their geometric precision beneath the waters of Lake Superior. The trade routes still follow the most efficient paths across continental landscapes, waiting for new generations to rediscover their logic. Because silence is not the opposite of achievement. It is achievement's completion, the necessary pause that allows accumulated wisdom to settle into the landscape itself, becoming part of the continent's permanent memory. And America, patient beyond measure, keeps every note of the great symphony of consciousness, waiting for minds ready to hear the music that connects earth to sky, past to future, the ancient engineers to all who would follow in their footsteps. So when you look up at the stars tonight, from whatever familiar place you call home, remember that you are not observing, but participating, not discovering, but rediscovering, carrying forward capabilities and longings inherited from ancestors who once watched those same constellations wheel overhead from earthwork observatories they built with mathematical precision across the American landscape. The cycle continues. The continent remembers. And somewhere in the genetic depths of American consciousness, the ancient engineers are still at work, still building, still reaching toward understanding that transcends the boundaries of any single civilization's brief moment in the vast dance of cosmic time.